The time is just gone, 5 minutes past 8 p.m. Central African time. And if you have just tuned in, you are tuned into the Alternative Voice with myself, Inayat Wadi. I will be with you right until 9 p.m. Earlier on, we spoke with Gilbert Messier talking about the seeds of revolution that are being planted by white racism in the United States of America. And with the COVID-19 pandemic rife right across the entire world, we are going to be unpacking developments in this country, looking at the crisis, but also looking at related issues from a political perspective, a health, a legal perspectives, and also looking at some of the issues that are playing out in the background, the impact on the social system, on the social justice system, socio-economic, and the like as well. And this evening, our core area or the key area of focus is going to be the political impact on the ANC-led government, and this is as a result of some of the court cases that have already come up and the judgments that have gone against the National Command Council in the country, and saying that these COVID-19 regulations have been irrational and have gone against the Bill of Rights and also the constitution of the country. Now, this evening, we are joined by Selo Lediga, who is a political analyst, and also Mapaseka Muroa. And this interview is going through live on the various platforms and also on facebook.com/Salam Media. And it's time now for us to welcome our guest, Selo Lediga and Mapaseka Muroa. Selo, good evening to you and welcome to the show.
Oh, good evening, Inayat, and your listeners and your viewers and all the people that support the organization.
Well, it's great seeing you, Selo. You know, we've spoken so much over the phone, and it's lovely seeing your wonderful, your handsome face this evening.
Thank you very much.
Right, and also we've got the lovely Mapaseka Muroa, a political analyst. Mapaseka, good evening to you. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Right, I'm going to start off with ladies first because I know you've got limited time, Mapaseka. You've got about half an hour with us. Now, I'm just trying to unpack the developments with regard to COVID-19 and how this has been managed in the country by the government, by the National Command Council. And initially, when President Cyril Ramaphosa first addressed the nation, he had the entire nation that had rallied behind him. But since then, we've seen a lot that has actually happened, and people at this point in time are starting to have second thoughts. They're starting to doubt the government's intentions. And the key issue here is managing this pandemic. And in your analysis, until now, what are your thoughts on how well or how bad has the government managed this crisis?
Look, I think initially what the government wanted to do and is still trying to do is make sure that they preserve life, right? The lives of South Africans, which is a right that is enshrined in Chapter 2 of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, to ensure that, the right of life of every single South African is protected. And that initially was to look at other countries in the world. What are they doing? How are they responding? The likes of China, that had dealt with the situation. And so the initial thing that, the government, the president was trying to do was, okay, here are the things that have worked, and we're now trying to implement that. The likes of South Korea have had instances with MERS and SARS in the past. So they were more than prepared to deal with COVID-19 because they know that in that area of the world, they, very much deal with this kind of situations a lot. So you think of the 3 T's in South Korea: testing, trust, tracking. So they were more than prepared. I think now looking at the economic impacts, right, of COVID-19, we didn't know how long this was going to last. We still do not know to this day. But I think the initial response for me, they did what they could. But right now it's thinking tailored for South Africa. How do we ensure a practical system to ensure that, number one, people don't die, and number two, the economic impacts are not as severe, right? So that we ensure that people don't worry about both death and hunger as it is the case currently.
Yes, and I also like to bring Selo into the discussion. And as soon as Cello joins us. Okay, I've seen Cello on the screen. Cello, the key issue here for me is, we know initially the country had rallied behind the president of the country. But when we see what has taken place recently, we've seen a number of court challenges that have arisen. When President Cyril Ramaphosa spoke to the military, for instance, and he asked them to treat the people with respect, because we know people were in a state of fear, people were in a state of paranoia, worried about where the next meal is going to come from, worried about losing their jobs. And then we've seen the killing of Collins Koza, which obviously was widely publicized. At the same time, we've seen a lot of draconian legislation that had come to the fore. And this is where huge question marks were raised against the Bill of Rights, whether it conformed to the Bill of Rights, and whether these regulations are obviously tested by the Constitution. Just looking at the impact of these judgments that have now gone against the government.
Yes, Nat, right at the beginning, it was going to be a balance between lives and livelihoods. We must congratulate the president and the government for the exceptional decision they took right at the beginning to put us under lockdown, even before the first death. But the question in that was going to be, for how long are we going to sustain just staying at home, and sacrificing the economy? And it's quite clear now that after 21 days, people became a little bit impatient now that we were told that this thing was gonna come to an end, and then the president kept on increasing the days in which people are supposed to be at home. Then it was no longer just about lives; it also now became about livelihoods. People it's like a long strike. You can't sustain it. People had to deal with this thing and ultimately say, but we need to make a living. But coming to the question of the court challenges, we must understand that we are back in politics. The Democratic Alliance has always had a clear budget on lawfare. How do you use the courts in order to achieve your political objectives? The mistakes that were made by the Command Council, which even the president acknowledged, gave them the opportunity to start challenging some of the regulations, and we know that people have been challenging the act itself. So essentially, what we are seeing here is that the opposition parties definitely have to find some political space, because if you look at this pandemic all over the world, it favors the governing parties, because everybody wants to know what the government is going to do. So you find that the opposition parties all over the world are marginalized. So that's why you see all these challenges from the DA as a way of saying we are still available, we are still in opposition, people must still vote for us, but we can't allow a situation whereby it's just Ramaphosa and his ANC cabinet. So for me, it is an attempt to reclaim the political space, to make sure that Sten Eisen speaks, Julius Malema speaks, and all other parties also speak. Eventually, I believe things will become normal. And as you have seen today, Julius Malema was, raving and ranting to say we are back in business as a political party. So for me, the court challenges were actually inevitable in a situation whereby Parliament is hung out because it cannot operate under these circumstances. The executive is having a nice time. The judiciary is here and there. So in my view, we're going to see this until we reach level 1, because it is the only space that still isn't in the DA can claim, which is at the courts.
Yes. Now, also, I think I just like your comments as well, Mopuseka, with regard to what Cello is saying. I think the critical issue is, we know politicians will be politicians, and they will take political mileage, or they will make political capital out of any situation, whether we're in a normal situation or we're in a pandemic and in crisis mode at this point in time. But that is the nature of politicians. But just looking at it from the government's perspective, because all focus, all eyes are on the government, all focus is on the National Command Council. And when they talk about mistakes, and they're saying, mistakes have happened, But when you have a court finding that talks about whether something is rational or irrational, or whether a regulation is rational or irrational, now clearly some of these judgments have been quite scathing. They've been quite harsh. And can we just, just call them mistakes? We know that, we were in a situation where COVID-19 unknown, we didn't know how to handle the situation, the disaster management and the like. But can we just attribute that to mistakes, or do you think, the whole question surrounding managing this entire pandemic should have been thought through a lot more carefully?
I mean, when you think about it, there wasn't adequate time to really think about it and what to do, except if, the government had taken cognizance of the warnings like 5 years prior when Bill Gates was at a TED talk and said, look, actually, there might be a pandemic on our hands in the next few years and we need to prepare for that. I think specifically the court case, the Liberty court case versus the Minister of Cogdam. I mean, you look at that court case, and it's not final to say, because the government has expressed that they will indeed appeal the matter. Number one, so we're going to see them go to the North Gauteng High Court to appeal it, regardless of who the court favors in that instance. We're going to see another appeal in the Supreme Court of Appeal, and then to the Constitutional Court, because this is a constitutional matter. And the two parties in this instance want to see the Constitution kind of make the final ruling and say, look, this is where the courts stand on the situation. Another thing would be how interesting the trias politica has been playing out, the separation of powers, the three different arms of government, the judiciary, parliament, and the executive. And I think what they've been trying to do, this particular organization, is try to find a blueprint on how the regulations were supposed to be implemented or even decided. We've never dealt with this kind of situation in South Africa. And so now we're sitting with a case of, well, for the next time, how do we establish a blueprint to know that when this happens the next time, this is how to deal with it? But I think that at the end of the day, it's also important to understand that what's happening right now is to limit the powers of government. That's kind of like the political thing that's going on here. That look, the executive is not the only arm of government that's in power. There's also the judiciary that can also perform checks and balances on the executive. And that's the kind of situation that we see. But I think that at the end of the day, this is a paradox. And there's kind of no winning when you think about it, because if we remain in a lockdown, people die of hunger. When we're out of the lockdown, people may potentially die. And, there's been this narrative that the people that people, but then at the same time, it's like this very same poor people have dealt with inequality all their lives. They are the people who go into mines and they still get sick from other diseases. So it's a paradoxical case. And it's kind of a situation.
We have lost just some contact. Okay, we see Bopsika is back again. You could continue.
Yes. I was saying that, it's a bit of a paradox, because give and take situation, but at the end of the day, it seems that there is no winning. Regardless of what the government does, right? There will always be opposition. There will always be someone who is unsatisfied with the result. I mean, you think of South Korea, right? They've dealt beautifully with this situation of COVID-19, where the World Health Organization has actually commended them, right? One of the three T's, right? Their response is tracking. If you think about that, that's actually a bill of right, right? It's enshrined in our constitution. So you think, who exactly is going to be okay with the government tracking them and actually compromising, or rather infringing on their right to privacy at the end of the day? So those are the kind of things that we need to consider. What do we want to preserve? A, life, or B, our economic rights, our freedom of movement, and to be able to earn a living?
Yes, and I'd just like Cello to come into the discussion and just following up from what you've just said. Cello, the key issue here in South Africa, and we know we've come into this pandemic against a background of massive social inequality in the country. And what COVID-19 has done is it's just made the problem even worse. Now, earlier on, I spoke to somebody out of the United States of America, and the statement that he made is this is a reflection on governments in terms of how well or how badly they manage the situation and how competent or incompetent the government would be to try and minimize the damage or minimize the impact of this pandemic. And I just like your thoughts in terms of the government and the management, because when we're looking at limiting the powers of government, as it has been alluded to, do you think there is too much power that is just concentrated in the hands of a few individuals? Because we've seen these regulations come willy-nilly, and sometimes it's actually, it seems or it appears as if this is a personally motivated or and when we look at people like Becky Kelly, we know the cigarette debate that is taking place with regard to Dlamini Zuma as well. So just in terms of looking at limiting the powers of politicians or those who are in command.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think this is a very important point. Remember, all governments all over the world are authoritarian by nature. And you give them enough power without accountability, they would actually take more. So if you look at it, the manner in which the ministers have conducted themselves, it's a clear appetite for power that must be kept as far as I'm concerned, because if you don't do that, people get used to it. People get used not to being accountable, and they think they can do as they wish. When you talk to ordinary people, they don't talk about the Bill of Rights and others. All they tell is that this government is beginning to oppress us, And for me, that is very important, that people are beginning to develop that kind of perception. So whatever happens, we need to make sure that government continues to be held accountable so that it does not go, on a journey that ultimately will sacrifice. If you look at the history of mankind, freedom sometimes is more important than life itself. Just imagine how many people have decided to sacrifice their lives just to fight for this ideal called freedom. So it is something that is very important. So I hope that government is gradually working towards normalizing the political and constitutional situation. As my sister has indicated that, the three arms of government are meant to check one against the other, so that we don't have the executive that continues to govern without accountability. Even though people are so scared, they are happy that their lives are being saved. At the end of the day, you're going to have to choose between your life and freedom. And what I've seen in the past is that people will always choose their freedom if you take it away from them. So I hope that Ramaphosa and these people are looking at it properly and making sure that even though we care about our lives, it is important to realize that the economy must be allowed to perform, because livelihoods are very important. I saw a woman on television who was arrested for selling peanuts, and I was asking myself, but this person is prepared to be arrested just for peanuts. But if you don't understand her situation and how difficult it is for her to put bread on the table, except to selling those peanuts, you will not understand. And in her, the choice was very stark. It's peanuts or no food at home, And then she actually chose peanuts to sell, But the question is the government right in terms of the way it is dealing with her? That is very a different thing, because this person now has to survive, whatever it takes. So in a nutshell, I'm saying, while we want to save our lives, we must be careful that we don't sacrifice our freedom.
Definitely. Now, I know, Mapaseka, you've got about 5 minutes or so with us, and you need to leave at 8:30. Just looking at where we are, and just over 2 months later, as far as this crisis is concerned, and from a government's perspective, if obviously there could be in the long term, whatever decisions the government makes at this point in time with regard to managing this pandemic, it could possibly impact on them politically going into the future. and we know mistakes, and they've admitted to their mistakes. But to an extent, some damage has been done. What sort of damage control do you think that the government needs to do at this point in time to restore some sort of credibility, for want of a better term?
Look, I think it's a democracy thing. What would be interesting for me to see is perhaps a referendum vote. Allow the people to decide whether or not they do not want the lockdown any longer and they want to fully participate in the economy or not. I think democracy is something that it's fragile, right? We always think of it as okay, this it's just about our vote, right? At the end of the day, and then you have this government that we've chosen to decide on our behalf. But I think if the ANC led government put that power in the people's hands, as they often say that look, it's the people that govern, allow the people to decide for themselves if whether or not, because when you think about it, there is no objectivity. We're all arguing from a subjective stance point of view. The layperson on the street who is in the informal sector and can't work right now, the person who's been retrenched, the people who freelance and have been waiting on that 350 rands unemployment grant that seems to be coming never. They're having a difficult time. But then you have people who've got, compromised immune systems who are saying, well, why should kids go back to school? What if they also, come back with the COVID-19 and they infect us as well? So at each side of the coins, there is no right or wrong answer. So put the power in the hands of South Africans, allow them to decide with the referendum vote and see where it goes from there. Because when the people have decided, then they can't say, well, the government should have done this instead and not that, rather.
Yes, but I think just on the subject, obviously at this point in time, we've now 2 months later, and I would like to think that many of us in this country, in South Africa, are responsible citizens, and we know the danger that COVID-19 poses. We know of the danger of the pandemic, and in terms of taking the necessary precautions that we are required to take. So we have got some knowledge now, for want of a better term, in terms of how, on a personal level, on a societal level, and as a country as a whole, in terms of what sort of precautions we must take. And the key issue here is do we still need draconian legislation to manage the country or manage people? And Cello alluded to the case of the elderly lady who was selling peanuts. Now, these are the type of issues which I think stick with people, which stick with the population. The issue of Collins Kosa, that is what is actually sticking, and that is where the problem actually arises.
Yeah. Look, we don't need draconian measures, right? We need reasonable measures where people can still feel their freedom. However, human nature is very interesting, right? You would think that something as common sense as, the police doing their job in a reasonable manner is something common sense, but you realize that common sense is actually not that common. You see the case of George Floyd and just police brutality in general in the US, how the police are meant to protect, right? But then you still see a police officer with his knee on a man that can't breathe, and you wonder, well, is common sense really that common? So at the end of the day, it's also a case of ensuring, yes, people know what they should do, what they shouldn't do, but there still need to be measures in place that ensure that beyond reasonable measures. So at the end of the day, people need to be regulated, and that's just how, unfortunately, human nature is. We constantly need to be reminded. But also another interesting thing is that the social and economic state of South Africa coming into play. You, of course, mentioned, Collins Causa, and just people in general, inequality in general is coming to play, and you wonder, when is enough really enough? When do South Africans say, look, this pandemic is also exposing the current state? If people can fight so hard for their freedom of movement, why can't we fight even harder for equality, for economic emancipation. And those are the issues that need to come to the forefront, to the table, to say, well, if we can go to court, all the way to the constitutional court, to ensure that we've got freedom of movement, we also need to ensure that we've got economic emancipation. And I think those are the conversations and the kind of things that are coming to the forefront. But also, I mean, the likes of Collins Koza and the 11 other people who have died at the hands of police and the army, it's just a reflection of, black bodies and how infantile and trivial they are in the rest of the world. In China, black people were accused of being carriers of COVID-19 when we know that the virus originated in Wuhan. In the US, we see black people being afraid to actually comply with regulations like wearing a mask because they know that they will be perceived as criminals. So in South Africa, in the army. So it just speaks to the wider problem, the black question, how the black body is treated in the world. And, what we're seeing right now with hashtag
Yes, I think obviously there seems to be a breakdown with Mapaseko. But what we're going to do right now, I see Cello is back with us as well. The time is just gone 8:31. We're going to go for a quick ad break. Cello, we'll come back to you just after the ad break.
Taj Mahal Spice and Rice. For over 80 years, Osman's Taj Mahal have been perfecting the art of the perfect blend of spices, pure, aromatic, and well-seasoned. Spices to tantalize your taste buds. From creative cuisines to gastronomical gourmet goodies. From exotic odors to traditional dishes, Osman's Taj Mahal have remained synonymous with quality spices and condiments. Taj Mahal rice, beans, and lentils. Try our range of chili bite mixes, rose and ilachi syrup, our quick and easy biryani pack, and our traditional range of spice blends. Osman's Taj Mahal. There is no substitute for quality.
Never before has humanity faced a pandemic like the COVID-19 virus.
The World Health Organization has declared the coronavirus outbreak as a global pandemic.
Penny Appeal believes in prevention being the cure, and we remain firm in standing by our commitment to support and help those in need.
The border have closed, so are very, very affected. So
they are lacking in the supplies.
I hope government can find a solution.
Our response is to provide hardship grants to those experiencing a loss in income in the months to come, and hygiene kits for the vulnerable at home here in South Africa and Syria and Palestine. Show compassion in the midst of crisis. Donate to our coronavirus emergency appeal now. Be proactive. Be aware. Help save a life. Donate today. Call 031 11 00573 or donate via www.pennyappeal.org.za. Penny Appeal. Small change, big difference.
Breaking stereotypes, moving boundaries, joining hands. Salam Media. Humanity sets the agenda.
Time is just gone 8 on the Alternative Voice this evening with myself, Inayat Wadi. Will still be with you right until 9 p.m. And right now we are looking at COVID-19 in South Africa, looking at it from a management perspective, but also discussing some of the related issues, like, for instance, the regulations, the court cases, the question of police brutality, and also in terms of how rational the regulations have been, and also the impact on a broader society from a social perspective and also from an economic perspective. And we still have got Selo Lediga, who is with us this evening, and he'll be with us right until 9 p.m. Now, Selo, just to continue, and earlier on when we were talking about with Mapasika Morowa about the regulations being unreasonable, but the key question, and she raised something that is very, very important in terms of the system. And there is sometimes something that is horribly wrong with the system. And she spoke even about Black Lives Matter and the killing of George Floyd in the United States of America. And one thing that came out very, very strongly in the United States of America, that the killing of George Floyd was not just a killing, it was a killing because something is terribly wrong in the system, in the US system, in the social order, in the economic system, in terms of capitalism. And the earlier guest that I spoke, he spoke about a billionaire class together with their political surrogates and using the security apparatus. Now, if we apply this in the South African context and just to look at our system and what is wrong in the system, and that is the reason why, we find it very difficult to make certain decisions that may be seen as fair and acceptable to broader society.
Yeah, in South Africa, the biggest indictment against the government, it's failure to deliver what is supposed to be delivered. The irony of it all is that, are you aware that this virus has done something that this government has failed to do in 26 years? And I can tell you, Anaiti, that after this whatever we call it now, our hospitals are going to be better than they were before the virus. Our schools, go to the rural areas. Schools don't have water. Schools did not have sanitation. But because of COVID, there's been so much money spent on the infrastructure in schools, which is the positive part of what has happened, But it is also an indication how government had actually abandoned part of the important responsibility that any government has got to take, in terms of providing that. So we must also be grateful. We must not just be negative. And I was talking to somebody and I said, no, all the things about the NHI and the hospitals that are not waiting, are going to be resolved now, because I'm convinced now that government has made sure that every hospital works. Government, with the support of the unions now, is making sure that every school works, So ultimately, we might be grateful, despite the lives that we are going to use, that without this virus, there was no way that this government was going to respond, progressively and in the interest of the people. So I just felt I should start with that, because I don't want to forget it. Number two, the whole question of brutality against people, especially black people all over the world, it's a universal phenomenon. I do not understand why black people have to be brutalized all the time wherever they are, even in the countries where they are in the majority. In America, black people are actually a minority, African Americans, But look what happens all over Africa. You find that black people are still brutalized by black governments, So maybe that's something that we'll have to discuss the other day, But at the end of the day, it is a question of human dignity. Whether we are going to create a society in South Africa that says all people are equal, except the fact that inequality, your equality means nothing if you are poor. Let's be frank. If somebody is poor and the other is rich, equality means absolutely nothing, because your dignity depends on the little that you have. If you have no money, your kids can't go to school, they're starving. And what is your dignity and what is the equality before the law? There's none. So at the end of the day, it is very important that there's economic empowerment, as Mapasika has indicated, that there's sufficient training so that people can move from poverty and move into the middle class and make sure that they can do something for themselves. That for me is very important. I hope that the government has noticed that more than anything else, COVID has exposed this government for its failure for the last 26 years.
Well, definitely, Selo. In fact, it's not only this government, but we see analysts and we see economists right across the entire world talking about the entire world economy has been exposed horribly as a result of COVID-19. And we even in a country like the United States of America, we heard of Obamacare and healthcare and all of that. And it's basically exposed right across Europe. We've seen it in countries like Italy, in Spain, where there wasn't sufficient bed space and ventilators and you name it. All of it has basically come short. So this is a problem right across the entire world.
No, that's correct. You see, we may have to go back to the question of capitalism versus socialism. That capitalism by itself will never be a caring system, because capitalism is like a jungle. It is the survival of the fittest, So for the weak, they will remain poor. They will die in their numbers. They will be killed like George Floyd and all that. So as far as I'm concerned, we still are battling with the system that would be humane, and make sure that it cares for all the people, It is just unfortunate that socialism seems to die with the demise of the Soviet Union, although China is something else, But my point is that we must accept one thing, that the international economic system will never serve the majority of the people in the world. And how we are going to deal with this, I do not know. But the fact of the matter is that it's an indictment on the world system that so few people have got so much, and so many people have got so little, with the result that people die of diseases that they shouldn't be dying of, And in fact, the rich sometimes die because they've got so much money that they're killing themselves out of that money that they have and the disease that they have, So at the end of the day, we must accept the fact that there is an international economic system that has never favored the poor, and by not favoring the poor, it has never favored the majority in the world.
Yes, exactly. And I think the key issue here is one needs to look at the risks and one needs to look at the threats that are associated with this huge divide that we see. Because we've heard about over 2,000 people that control over 60% of the entire wealth around the entire world.
Yes.
And this is where we are talking of this big divide, this huge gap between the super rich and the rest of the world, because it's fast becoming that, where you're looking at the few against the rest of the world. And this is why, there is a mental crisis that obviously is looming as a result of COVID-19. But also, people are getting angry, and we know a hungry man is an angry man. There is always this risk of starvation bringing about a revolution. Now, the key question here is, if the capitalist model is not working, we look at the socialist model as well, but we cannot even use China as an example, because we know that there is a lot of corruption that is taking place in China, where we know a handful of privileged or prime land. So we've got this problem right across the entire world, Cello.
Absolutely. I think COVID has given us an opportunity to relook at the world, and look at what we are doing, because how is it possible that so many people suffer while a few people control the world? But let's quickly go to a question of leadership. The United States of America is supposed to be the superpower, but it has basically elected a madman who sits in the White House, a man who has no empathy, a man who has no common sense, a man who's got his head on the greatest military force we've ever heard of, But a person who does not understand what leadership is in terms of his own people first, even before he comes to the world, Because for Trump, the most important thing is that America must be number one in economic power in the world. Whether 1 million people die in America, it doesn't matter to him, because what he's interested in is re-election in November. And he's praying wherever he is that by November, the COVID would have subsided, and then you can show the American people that, look, the economy is still working. It's just that there's a spanner in the works now. He did not think about George Floyd, that something like this would happen, because now I don't know how he's going to be re-elected. When you consider the two
exactly
things,
just your thoughts on President
and
just your thoughts on President Cyril Ramaphosa in terms of leadership and the leadership that he's shown on a personal level in terms of this crisis and how it has been managed, because they have certain question marks have been raised whether he is truly, or is he really in this country.
Yeah.
Hello?
You know what? One thing I will tell you is that his leadership style of always consulting, it's not really helpful. Because remember, when you become a president, you are given powers that you must use in order to drive your country in a particular direction, you know. And I know that consultation is a nice democratic thing to do, but I have a sense that our president does not use the authority that he has in order to lead properly. At every corner, he wants to be listening to other people. There are so many people that you are going to listen to, but at the end of the day, you must understand that we don't make you commander-in-chief for nothing. We make you commander-in-chief because we want you to command us. And you cannot be commanding us when in every corner you are going to talk to the Stockfell here, they tell you to do this. You are going to talk to the churches, they tell you to do this. You are going to talk to the alcohol lobby, they are going to tell you this. Ultimately, you end up not emerging as a true leader of the people because people are not sure where you stand. You know? And this story about him contesting for power with the Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma is exactly because of this inability to show that I am in charge. I'm the president. I'm the commander-in-chief. I will listen to you, but I will take my own decisions. In this respect, I think the president will have to improve, you know, because politics is about power. And if you have power and you do not use it, what happens with it? It will go elsewhere.
Exactly. Well, Sela, we're going to put you on hold. We're going to go for a quick break. We'll be back.
Okay. All right.
Range of cooking oil, spreads, rice, and maize meal, you'll be dishing out the most delightful dishes every day. Delight. Try it today. Delight is delightful.
You may be out there in the working space building your future. Perhaps you are as comfortable on the sports field as you are in the boardroom, or hard at work being the best student possible. You could be spending most of your time at home grooming the leaders of tomorrow. Either way, you need to feel confident, strong, and comfortable. Eternity Sanitary Pads, now available at a store close to you.
Listen to something fresh. Listen to Salam Media.
The time is just gone, 13 minutes p.m. Central African Time on the Alternative Voice, and we have been talking with Sello Lediga, looking at South Africa, looking at the decision-making in the country, and also how COVID-19 has been managed by the National Command Council. And we're also joined on the line now by Shabnam Palesa Mohammed, who is the host of People's Voice on Salam Media, and she is on from 7 to 8 p.m. on Sundays. Shabnam, assalamu alaikum, and welcome to the show. Shabnam, I think we're going to try and just see if we can't hear you. We're going to try and get hold of Shabnam. Sello, are you back with us as well? Sello is not back with us too. Okay, we are obviously going to speak to Shabnam and looking at it from what is happening on the ground, the thoughts that people are actually conveying in terms of how the government is managing and whether the government has been competently dealing with the situation, considering that we've had a number of court cases, and apparently the cigarette case is obviously starting today, or I think no, it's starting tomorrow. So that's going to be quite an interesting development, because we know the sale of cigarettes has been a major bone of contention. It's been a huge issue in this country. So that will be quite interesting when that matter goes to court. And also at the same time, as far as the consequences for the ANC government when all of this is over. Will people remember what had happened during COVID-19 when they go to the ballot box, when they go and go to the polls, and when they go and elect the government? And also looking at opposition politics that is being played out. And we know, as Sello had mentioned, the opposition will be an opposition all the time, and they will oppose, and they will always find fault with what the government does, which is basically understandable, because that is the nature of the opposition. The key issue here, and these are some very, very critical issues as far as the government and its management of COVID-19 goes, is we know the damage has already been done. There has been a lot of damage to the economy. economists are already talking about the economy contracting by close on to 10%. And that is going to have huge impact, huge ramifications on a social level and a socio-economic level. Shabnam, I see you back with us. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam. Am I audible now?
Much better. Yes, loud and clear. Well, Shabnam, we have been talking with some political analysts and looking at the government, looking at the country, and also looking at these court cases that have taken place. There have been some scathing judgments that have gone against the government in terms of police brutality, in terms of how rational these regulations have been, how draconian these regulations have been. And just looking at it from your side, and I know that, you know, you are the champion of the voice of the people, and just your thoughts on what thoughts are running through, what people are actually saying in terms of this pandemic, and how are they reacting to what is happening in this country?
Thanks. It's a good question, Inayat, and an important one to be discussed quite candidly. I think for me, it's very exciting to use, you know, just a normal word, exciting, that people have woken up to the reality that we're living in an Orwellian dystopian time, not just during COVID-19, but before that. And one of the reasons I say that, because the minuscule service delivery additions that are happening now, for example, the provision of water, is something that could have been provided in the last 26 years, but the political will was completely lacking. And there is no empathy, there is no compassion towards the poor in our country. It's essentially the same as it is around the world, the 1% versus the rest of us, the middle class, the debt slaves, and the poor. But what is good is that people are waking up and now saying, why should I vote? This current system of democracy is not people-led. Representative democracy does not work. In fact, when I had Professor Sats Cooper in conversation a couple of months ago, according to him, the system that's in place now was not supposed to be the permanent system. It was supposed to change to a people-led democracy where people have a voice. We don't have a voice. So to keep doing the same thing, expecting a different result, is certainly not going to work. And I think the next election is going to absolutely prove that to us, with people in their numbers deciding that they're not going to vote. Because whether Ramaphosa is replaced or not, it actually makes no difference. Presidents are chosen by the capitalist elite. They're funded by the capitalist elite to run a particular agenda. And it's time that a people-led democracy rises.
Well, it's amazing. You know, you've mentioned quite a few things, Shabnam, and when you speak about the Orwellian, and I had a guest earlier on who wrote a book on the Orwellian Empire. So that's quite a coincidence. But also at the same time, in terms of the sentiment that he had expressed, and he spoke about the billionaire class and the political surrogates. And this is exactly what we are seeing in other parts around the world. And I think it's to a large extent, we're seeing it in South Africa, because there have been huge question marks in terms of some of the decision making, in whose interests are some of these decisions being made.
100%. Of course, I think what we're experiencing is epidemic expediency. So the epidemic or the virus or the pandemic or the plandemic or whatever you want to call it is being used to drive through draconian autocratic ways of ruling people. The violence, of course, is I wouldn't even say it's more than normal. I would say the violence that we're experiencing has become normalized, and certainly it should not be something that we accept as normal, as just another Collins Khoza was murdered. That's not something we should be accepting. But at the same time, I think it's important for us to realize that this is a watershed moment for us, to realize that these billionaires and these politicians do not represent us. They represent their own interests. Most of them are not even qualified to be doing what it is that they're doing. They get into a comfortable position and they will do whatever it takes, whatever the party political line is, they will adopt that line merely to secure their positions. They do not care about the poor. They do not care about the violence that's going on. I mean, a couple of weeks back, the president of South Africa, I don't regard any president as my president, but was hosting a webinar with certain journalists, and the question of Collins Khoza came up, and his response was that the police were over enthusiastic, or the military was over enthusiastic. A leader of a whole country, and that is his response. that they were over enthusiastic, and that's why a man was murdered. He didn't lose his life, he was murdered. And that in itself just says to me how callous this billionaire class is. And we certainly cannot expect a president who still has bloodstains of Marikana on his hands to be a representative of the people. As polished as he may be, as lovely as he appears to be on TV, at the end of the day, the billionaire class is for themselves. Having said that, again, I will repeat, replacing Ramaphosa is not going to solve anything for us. We need a people-led democracy.
Exactly. And I think just looking at it from an economic perspective and an economic ideology, and we've seen right across the entire globe the failure of capitalism, and that has manifested itself very, very clearly in during this time of the COVID-19 crisis. Now, socialism obviously is an alternative, but at the end of the day, under a socialist order again, are we going to see the type of starvation? Are we going to see people, reliant on handouts? Are we going to see food banks? Are we going to see more and more people on a social welfare system? Because to a large extent, I think when you look at governments, they enjoy this, they like this, because there's more social grants you give, you're basically retaining your voter base.
Right. So more dependency, that's exactly what they want, which is why I don't even like to talk anymore in terms of a binary. So it's either capitalism or it's socialism. Resource-based economy is a way that we can go. Food banks, I agree with. Growing food, I agree with. This dependency in the conglomerates that were allowed to trade when the hawkers down the street could not trade is a crime against humanity. And certainly people need to be taking these matters to court and challenging the constitutionality of all these actions and suing for damages. But there are alternative ways of organizing, municipality by municipality, city by city, reducing the dependence on the system. But first of all, reminding yourself that government is supposed to be public servants. If they are not acting as public servants, they must be fired.
Exactly. And I think the key issue here is also transparency, because at this moment in time, there are huge question marks that are being raised as far as transparency. Are we being told the truth? Are we being told everything that we are supposed to know?
No, most certainly not. I mean, this is a sort of a paternalistic attitude by governments around the world where we will tell you what we think is necessary for you to know. And thankfully, people are not stupid. We're not sheep. We're waking up to the lies, the inconsistencies, the inaccuracies in everything, from the healthcare perspective to the economy, to the violence, the state violence that's been perpetrated against people. People are waking up, and we certainly are at a watershed moment. I mean, there's protests around the world currently under the hashtag Black Lives Matter. Those people are not sitting in fear about the COVID-19. They're realizing that the real fear is being completely suppressed and dominated by this ruling class. But having said that, I don't think we should be giving up. I think we need to up the ante. I think we need protests in our country. I see there's movement toward that happening now, and we need to ride that wave and make sure that we turn 2020 and what lies beyond that into a success story for the 99%.
Shabnam, just finally, with all these judgments that have gone against the government and some of the attacks, the scathing attacks by the judges in their judgments, can the government hide behind the excuse that this COVID-19 pandemic caught us out of the blue? We didn't know any better. We didn't know how to manage the situation, and we made mistakes. Can they hide behind this excuse of making mistakes?
Absolutely not. What have we been doing for the last 26 years, where suddenly we're hit with a virus and we don't know what to do? We don't have the healthcare infrastructure. We don't realize that we should be educating people rather than beating them into submission. When has that ever worked? No, this government can certainly not come up with hit us by surprise and we were listening to the WHO, so we were following those protocols. No, this is supposedly a sovereign country the last time that I checked. Certainly by the behaviors of those who claim to be leading us, one cannot claim that it's a sovereign country. Who are we actually accountable to? Who have we sold our country to? Taking out more IMF loans? Is that the solution? Or should we be nationalizing the mines and making sure that those resources belong to the people of this country? So the government will lose in court. Its capitalist class will fund it in those battles at court, but the people have to maintain a determination and resolution to make sure that the courts hold them accountable on behalf of the people.
Well, Shabnam, being an attorney by profession, it was great tapping into your legal mind as well at the same time, and also in terms of your analysis. Unfortunately, time has run out, but once again, an absolute pleasure having you join me on the show this evening, and we wish you all the best. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam. Thank you very much.
Shabnam Palesa, Mohammed, ending off the show. Once again, it's been an absolute pleasure being back on this particular segment of the show, The Alternative Voice, and we are going to bring you a lot more discussions over the next few months, and I'm sure there's a lot that is still going to be taking place, and we'll try and keep our finger on our pulse and try and bring you whatever we can, and more importantly, presenting you an alternative. And that is the reason why this is called The Alternative Voice. But for now, it's just gone 9 p.m. It's time for me to sign off for myself and Sadiq behind the controls and the rest of the team at Salam Media. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Listen to something fresh. Listen to Salam Media. Your